Hello, everyone. My name is Asma Faris. I'm the Research and Coordination Assistant at Transparency International Lebanon. Before we start, I would like to mention that there is interpretation for today's webinar. You can find the globe-shaped button downstairs. Should you like, it's available from two English language. آه، مرحبا بالجميع. أسماء فارس، أنا مساعدة الأبحاث والتنسيق بالجمعية اللبنانية، جمعية الشفافية الدولية لبنان. بحب أخبركم إنه في ترجمة، أو اللي بحب هي موجودة بشكل الكرة الأرضية اللي موجود تحت. موجودة ترجمة من وإلى اللغة العربية أو الإنجليزية، اللي بحب. We will be starting the webinar with a poll. I will launch it right now. Kindly fill it so we could start with Dr. Karim. You can see the poll on your screen. I would like to clarify that the first question is pointing out to the vital role of the Lebanese diaspora in the fight against corruption. Thank you everyone for taking the time. We will be starting our webinar. Welcome again to today's webinar on the role of diaspora in the fight against corruption in Lebanon, public disclosure of assets and punishment of illicit enrichment. This webinar will be discussing the role of diaspora in the fight against corruption based on a recent study published by Transparency International Lebanon. It will also highlight opportunities in fighting illicit enrichment as a ground for collaboration through outlining a case study on the illicit enrichment campaign being carried out, given that diaspora groups can play a vital role in anti-corruption reforms through their empowerment with the financial and interest disclosure and punishment of illicit enrichment law. Our first speaker will be Dr. Karim Al-Mufti. Dr. Karim is a professor of political science and international law, presently based in Paris. In 2008, he pioneered the Human Rights Legal Clinic of La Sagesse University Law Faculty in Beirut, which he directed for 14 years, forging durable bridges between academia and civil society organizations, while advocating for human rights and human development in Lebanon through research and training programs. Today, he serves as an international expert for justice and security affairs with substantial expertise in the areas of state building, rule of law, transitional justice, and digital government. Dr. Karim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope the connection is clear. I hope you can all see me. I'll share my screen in a minute. Thank you, Transparency International Lebanon, for hosting me. It's always a pleasure. As you said, we initiated a study for the Lebanese Transparency Association, now Transparency International Lebanon, on the role of the diaspora. So I'll be sharing some very shortly some of the findings, some of the outputs of that little study, and try to initiate with you a small debate and a discussion on illicit enrichment, and what are the ways to engage against this, what are the ways for diaspora groups to lobby, what would be different bridging efforts to be initiated between Lebanon and those diaspora groups, between Lebanon and friends of the country, to be able to combat corruption. Corruption has been a deadly virus, another nature of COVID-19. It's directly involved in the port explosion, 4th of August, And so we see how gravely and devastating effects grave corruption and greater corruption can have on a given country. So the diaspora has been more and more involved on that issue specifically. It has been very much involved during the elections last year. And so we're going to see a bit how the diaspora groups can be even more mobilized on a very, very difficult, very complex, very technical, not really easy to lobby for or against, which is the corruption. Corruption has multiple facets, it has multiple dimensions. It is extremely hard to fetch information. It is really easy for stakeholders, authorities, officials to hinder any real effort to stop corruption or to hold people accountable over it. And we can see it again with the explosion of the port, where we have no sign of accountability, no sign of ending the impunity cycle. And this is, you know, tragedy in the size of the port explosion. So imagine how even harder it can be when you're looking at illicit enrichment of a public official, or money laundering, or embezzlement, or abuse of public funds, or embezzlement. How much can we get involved? Are there not other priorities? How much is illicit enrichment a priority today for the Lebanese community and for the diaspora? So when it comes to the, let's see if you can see the screen. Right, let me know if there's a sharing issue. I think I'm sharing now. Right, so this is the front page of the study that will be soon be published by Transparency International Lebanon. It's going to be available in English and in Arabic. And basically, when we talk about diaspora, obviously the very first thing that comes to mind is what many people actually call it, being a gold mine, right? So a gold mine of 10, 12, 16 million individuals that are sending remittances to Lebanon. This is something that can be measured. This is something that is extremely relevant and extremely present in Lebanese economy. And when you look at even more recent figures than what we have here from Banque du Liban, is obviously how larger the share of remittances will be in relation to the GDP, probably reaching maybe a third of the GDP today. So remittances between $6 and $9 billion a year for the past decade. Obviously, that was the cliche aspect of diaspora helping out their relatives, helping out families, helping out a charity in Lebanon through those very, very precious remittances. Again, making Lebanon keeping Lebanon in a system of what economists call a semi-rentier economy. So, as you can see here, the percentage of GDP, even though it decreased for the crisis, with the crisis just went back up to the roof with close to 26%, and today, 2 years later, even closer to 30 to 33% of GDP. So, what are the traditional forms of support that are showcased in this study? Nothing new for those who have joined. Obviously, there's a lot of caring, there's promotion, and there's investment. So in the caring aspect, you're going to have the charity investment, involvement. You're going to have obviously all the mobilization for education, for health, supporting NGOs, supporting dispensaries, supporting displaced, disabled programs. elderly programs, cancer programs, through different form of charity and caring programs. Then you have something that's very dear to the diaspora, which is, well, promoting everything that makes Lebanon unique. Everything makes that the diaspora members and diaspora groups are extremely close to their roots, extremely close to their culture, and this is also something that brings them together, that gives them
راسهم وهذا ما يجمعهم ويعطيهم الحافز ليتجندوا بحسب
motivations is local development, in small regions, small areas, development, artisanship, local agriculture, wineries, etc. You're going to have obviously the cultural promotion, the different patrimoine, richness of the country all over the regions. Again, depending on the diaspora groups and their points of origin and their roots and how they work closely together. You're going to have also environmental causes, preserving nature, preserving the cedars, preserving, ecological preservation, economical transition also today with the climate change issue, global warming, with the lack of electricity, and trying to find ways to decarbonize the Lebanese economy, either through energy or through waste management, and greening the different public spaces. And obviously the national heritage, whether from history, culture, developing museums, developing landmarks, again, something very dear to the diaspora. And the final and noticeable and very known, obviously, arc of the diaspora involvement traditionally in Lebanon is investing, business opportunities, mentoring, coaching, nurturing. Nurturing is a word that's used a lot in those diaspora groups that are involved in trying to really boost economically that country, boost the knowledge opportunities, transfers of technology, transfer of education, creating job opportunities for the youth, supporting different sectors, bringing in expertise. So again, that's something the diaspora is very much involved. So, and that's pretty much the traditional form of support, nothing new. All of you have come across one of these, maybe even we're part of it, promoting it, helping it, maybe initiating it based on your own relations with persons abroad. So when it comes to investing in Lebanon, something I call business angelism, it's really a huge wealth, a huge capital when you really measure it with a lot of events happening. Obviously, we're talking here before the crisis. One of the CEO of of an Arab bank was saying that there's a transfer of $1 million a day to Lebanese banks. This is close to 20 years ago. You have events like Planet Lebanon. I mean, again, we're not gonna draw a list of everything that used to happen in the world of investment. But basically, in the diaspora groups, you would have again two major metrics. One we call regime enablers, and the others, and the one that will interest us here, those supporters of change, right? So again, when you look at literature, theorists like Benedict Anderson would explain that exile is the cradle of nationalism, and that, well, that nationalism means that you're going to stay connected to not only the cultural, not only the economical, not only the social, but also the political aspect, right? You're going to keep an eye on the Zaim, you're going to stay involved in politics, you're going to stay involved in voting, you're going to bring votes, you're going to benefit from tickets for your whole family to go and vote during the elections in 96, in 2000, 2005, right? So really big support of diaspora throughout the world to those traditional sectarian political parties. But also another observation of social scientists like Apadurar say that, well, diasporas also can foster something new, a new popular, new inventive culture. And you can see it really even more recently with the new political engagement of many Lebanese expats, of those diaspora groups, not necessarily new groups, but groups that will take on more the political challenge. So moving from the regime enablers, right, that are producing the sectarian fragmentation, or importing the crisis and the fragmentation and the tensions in their country of residence, supporting traditional leaders, finding ways of staying loyal to them, with sometimes higher radicalism outside than inside because of the bubble effect, and that really would prefer for the regime to remain, and obviously not close to reform, but the reform has to be from within. And here, as a reward to those diaspora groups, we can remember together, for instance, the initiative of the former foreign affairs minister, Gibran Bassil, who had initiated a procedure for diaspora members to regain or receive their Lebanese nationality, right, should they be of Lebanese origin. Again, as a way to associate them even more to the civic and political approach of the Lebanese regime, thinking that it will bring more votes, that will consolidate their grip over the regime, not only the honest, but obviously all the rest. So everybody was very much open to that initiative, and it helped again bring many new nationals to the regime. But as you know, a lot of things happened. The Thawra, 17th of October, the uprising, and here, well, there's a kind of new signal by the diaspora groups, by the youth, connections between Lebanon and abroad, overwhelming the regime enablers, overwhelming this what really appears as a micro initiative of giving nationality and citizenship, because this is beyond citizenship. A lot of people, even without Lebanese passports or without Lebanese IDs, were here, came, supported, funded a lot of Thawra activities and initiatives, and wanted to be makers of change. Then a turning point, obviously, was the Beirut blast. Here, many groups, some which I interviewed, like SEAL and LIFE, joined by Lebnet, Jumhur alumni. They formed a unified humanitarian effort, as per their website, to initiate the Beirut Emergency Fund. That's close to $8 million in a matter of days to support those who became homeless, to support medical aid, to support with emergency reconstruction, and that was a huge mobilization, unseen for this generation by the diaspora. Again, pushing towards a turning point, pushing towards something that could be really different. And this was really apparent in the elections, right? If you look at the figures of the elections, 2018 and 2022, you can clearly see that, well, in terms of turnout, the diaspora is voting more than the residents in 2018 and in 2022. Even more, the difference is even more apparent in the 2022 election. And here you can really see, how it was multiplied by 4, actually. So not only when you compare the residents and the diaspora vote, but when you actually look at the figures, you can see, how different of a Lebanon and different of a diaspora civic awareness you have when you have, and when you look at the results and when you look at the votes disaggregation, you see how the diaspora immensely supported the arrival of newcomers, the Tahiriyin, in different districts to parliament, initiating new voting strategies, supporting registration, supporting the different lists in order to initiate change. So really a real leap into the political world, right? Something diaspora isn't really familiar with when it comes to opposition. It's familiar with when it comes to enabling the regime, but it's not really familiar when it comes to opposition. And now there's something that is here and is here to stay, and they're part of that landscape. And it's something that is obviously a strong base when we want to talk about, well, anti-corruption, right? Because all this political legitimacy, all this political buildup, at the end needs to be oriented towards some actions. And here, that's the question that Transparency International Lebanon was been raising. Are diaspora groups interested in anti-corruption, right? Because when you look at the national framework, right? If you look at the National Anti-Corruption Strategy document, right, for 2020-2025, well, there is a reference, and it's the only one, for the diaspora or for the Lebanese residing abroad, is that aspirations of the Lebanese people, both in Lebanon and abroad, to build a prosperous society and sustainable development standard, and that's it. So those in Lebanon and abroad have those aspirations, but there's no association, there's no bridge, there's no mechanism to bring them to the table and associate them more. Furthermore, let's look at something that even comes after the Beirut port explosion, the Lebanon Reform, Recovery and Reconstruction. Most of you are familiar with it, the 3RF of December 2020. And here there's a clear reference to the Lebanese diaspora. But again, it's really keeping it in the traditional basket, right? Active in the response, the funds, the reconstruction, the cleanup, the repair, the humanitarian aspect. Yes, but again, no real participatory in policy, in anti-corruption, in preventing something like this to happen again, right? Because it's what happened once, it can happen again. Do you see how criminal that regime is, how negligent it is, and how corruption is completely dislocated all state institutions and all accountability possibilities. So when you look at the internal documents, there's no real space. So the diaspora needs to create that space. It needs to really, if it wants to, again, that's the question that's raised, and we'll talk about it more with, I think Julien Cousson will be joining us in a bit to talk more specifically about what can be done with the diaspora groups on illicit enrichment. But as you can see, I mean, in the Lebanese framework, there's not much of notice of the diaspora, right? So that political identity, that political space that was conquered, well, it needs to now appear in, well, the lobbying aspect, in the mobilization, in the day-to-day initiatives, because that's where the international framework puts us, right? If you look at UNCAC, so Lebanon is part of UNCAC, right, since 2008. So that convention that is extremely valuable for fighting corruption talks about the fact that corruption is no longer a local matter, that it is a transnational phenomenon, that it affects all societies and economies, and that it fosters cooperation, right? It also talks about the role of NGOs, the roles of grassroots communities, of community-based organization, that the eradication of corruption is a responsibility not only of states, about the cooperation with other states and support and involvement and individuals, groups outside the public sector, civil society, etc. So UNCAC really frames it in a way that is participatory, that is open, that is inclusive, with this little limitation, obviously, because it's an international document framed by state, that those obligations have to keep in mind the principles of sovereign equality, of territorial integrity, and non-intervention in the domestic affairs. And we'll talk about this in a moment. Non-intervention in domestic affairs of other states, right? So on one side, we say cooperation between states, and the other we say, but states cannot meddle in my domestic affairs. And we'll see how corruption is perceived by different capitals, by countries, especially the countries that are friends of Lebanon, by the UN agencies, as something that is mainly a national effort. And this is why the diaspora here have a golden bridge, because it's really them as nationals or as descendants of Lebanese origin that want to be involved in that in the welfare of that country. This is exactly what the framework talks about. And so, but also offers a limitation about overreaching or over relying on states or international instruments, right? It's very hard to go and ask the Swiss, and this is something that you can see a lot, and a lot of Lebanese are asking the question, why are the Swiss not helping? Why are the French not helping? Why are the Americans not helping? Why is there no proper support here? Because it's a national framework, and if you internationalize it, you hinder that important UN principle of non-intervention in domestic affairs. And this is what really makes the specificity of this international instrument. It's not like terrorism, where you can really, where global security really destroys the barrier of meddling in domestic affairs, where you have other coercive instruments from the Chapter 7 and the UN Security Council that allows the UN, the states, multilateral bodies to really be more involved in security, more involved in human rights, more involved in justice, whereas corruption is not there yet. So probably Diaspora has a role to play on that level, because Lebanon, again, has really developed a very strong, institutionally speaking, a very strong legislative framework. The past 10 years, Lebanon has developed legislation against money laundering, access to information, whistleblower protection, establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Institution, the NACC, that is today functional, illicit enrichment law that interests us today, lawful recovery of corruption funds, promoting transparency in the petroleum sector. So there has been an inflation of legislative frameworks that need mechanisms to be actually implemented and respected, right? When it comes to illicit enrichment law, for instance, we don't have the proper data, and this is where the National Anti-Corruption Commission was created for. It receives, it manages, it investigates, as per its prerogatives in the law, the financial statements under the illicit enrichment regulations, right? It can, it has very strong prerogatives. So the NACC is a state institution. It's an oversight mechanism. It's independent. It's not under any branch of government, and it should have the proper staff, the proper funding, the proper, and it can really initiate lawsuits. It can sue officials. It can initiate whistleblowing protection. It can foster access to information demands and requests, etc., etc. So it's really a very important entry point to any activist, any NGO, any journalist, but it needs to be supported. It needs to be again nurtured, and it needs to be helped to reach the level it needs to be to play that role, right? Because we need, for instance, in illicit enrichment law, when something as basic as, what are the different, how much property Lebanese politicians own, right? And so you have NGOs like Rebel Initiative, for instance, that had a very easy, very interesting mapping just based on, the real estate, the registry is public. So you can go to the public registry, you just pay the tawabi, the stamps, and you can ask any Lebanese citizens what they have. And they have a very, very interesting, if you go on their website, they have a very interesting list, and you discover that, for instance, Juan Basil has 48 properties in his name, that Ghazi Aridi has 39 properties in his name, that Yassin Jabir has 186 properties in his name, Saad Hariri, so everybody is in, right? 71 properties, and you know where exactly. And the winner of all is Walid Jublat, 505 properties. So creating a bit the mountainous feudal system, even though he claims to be a socialist. So data collection in itself, sometimes very easy, but it really gets harder to understand So it's good to know that they have those properties. But how did they pay for it? How was the transaction? How did the transaction made? Where did this money comes from? Here, obviously, it's much harder to be able to retrieve that information and to be able to really assess whether there's corruption involved or not. It doesn't. That information in itself probably gives a perception of wealth, but it doesn't mean that it's not necessarily illegal or illicit. And so this is where, well, we need, again, mobilization. And this is where diaspora, the question of where diaspora comes in is interesting, because in that power struggle, and it is a power struggle, you have, as you can see, data collection here, because this is very extremely hard data to get, information about how this came to be, you know? And in order to defend Lebanese national interests, what kind of action, what kind of lobbying, with who do you work with, right? So you need to work with investigative journalists. You need to fund them. You need to support them, right? These investigative journalists, like Firas, who, you know, who is the one who told us about Savaro, right? That's investigative journalism. We wouldn't have known about Savaro. It was just sentenced by a UK court to pay reparations to the explosion of the Lebanese port, right? So very important information, very hard to get, and they managed to get it. This is the kind of media structure, media that is not really well, unfortunately, supported in the Arab world, even less in Lebanon. And this needs funding, this needs resources, this needs nurturing. And here the diaspora maybe can have an interesting take at it. NGOs, obviously, I talked about Rebel Initiative. We're in the middle of an event of the Transparency International Lebanon. You have Legal Agenda. You have ALDIC, you know, Association Libanaise for the rights of taxpayers, Voix des Citoyens. So many NGOs specializing in anti-corruption, having the expertise, not much resources, not much ability to take on that power struggle. And so it's all about bringing all those initiatives together. You got oversight mechanisms. I talked about the NECC. You have the Central Inspection Board. You have the Procurement Office that also has been struggling a lot to keep some sense of sanity to the lawfulness in public procurement. You've got the Institut des Finances of the Minister of Finance. So these are boards and units in the state that have prerogatives but need support, right? They need to be supported. They need to be nurtured, and they have ultimately and on paper some prerogative, some power to get data, to have action, to seize, to go forward, right? And not to forget the grassroots movements, without which there is no legitimacy. If the Lebanese turn their back to corruption, diaspora groups cannot alone fill in the gap. You need that grassroots movement. They are the ones supporting the NGOs' legitimacy. They are the ones protecting investigative journalists. They are the one going to oversight mechanisms and making and keeping this mechanic very smooth. Because again, it is a power struggle. Corruption is about power abuse. It's about embezzlement of public funds, about illicit enrichment. And here in Lebanon, the framework on the legal aspects is starting to take shape. But in the mechanisms, it's very brouillon yet. It's very hazy. And this is where you have a lot of opportunities for the diaspora groups to pick and choose. Where can they be useful? Where do they want to get involved? How can they support? Who are the champions of anti-corruption in Lebanon? And just throw themselves in that race, support those champions, and go forward in that big war against corruption. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karim. We have a question from Eugene Sansnig. The question on Christian-Muslim ethics and the diaspora, comparing Nigeria to Lebanon. are or can faith-based organizations play a role in fighting corruption, e.g., as related to the extractive industries or the smuggling of assets by diaspora?
Thank you, Eugene. Well, it's going to really be depending on their mission statement. Usually, faith-based organizations play the neutrality card. They're not much involved in political struggles, but the political play, the political power play, but doesn't mean that they shy away from policy issues. Among these, you can have environmental issues, you can have abuse issues when it comes to taxpayers. You can have human rights issues. Like faith-based organization playing a big role against the kafala system for migrant domestic workers, for instance, which is one of the doors of corruption in the country. It's not illicit enrichment, but it's in another area. So it all depends. It all comes down to how they see their role. I don't know any faith-based organization. Maybe some of the participants can point us in the right direction, but I don't know any faith-based organization that is ready to take on that power struggle. It doesn't mean that they are regime enablers. Many of them are very much in the resistance against dictatorship, resistance against sectarianism, against inequalities, but it doesn't mean that they are willing to use the tools of political struggle. They will mainly look at ways to reform and support different areas like poverty, like migrants, like refugees, like environmental issues, like fair trade, etc.
Thank you so much. I would like to kindly remind that there is an interpretation. You can find it at the bottom of the screen, the globe shaped, from to Arabic. بحب أذكر إنه في ترجمة متاحة عبر الشكل الكروي الموجود أسفل الصفحة من وإلى اللغة العربية أو الإنجليزية. شكرا لكم. And now I will be launching the second poll for you to fill in. There are still 6 people who haven't answered. We will wait for them to finish.
Maybe they're not in front of their screen.
They're answering.
Maybe I can use that time to answer another of Eugene's very interesting question,
Yes,
asking
please go ahead.
if I was saying that international law doesn't apply to corruption, and if you're still into a pre-Westphalian state with respect to retrieving stolen assets from Lebanon. I didn't really say that. It's not that international doesn't apply, on the contrary, is that on corruption, your entry point is your national judiciary. If your national judiciary is not functional, is not independent, and that's why that all the mechanisms of anti-corruption that you have, without the proper rule of law and independent judiciary, it's going to be very, very hard to access that international mobilization, because that mobilization is key. The UNCAC talks about state cooperation, but it's state cooperation. It's states cooperating. It's the Lebanese judiciary asking the Swiss judiciary. It's the Lebanese judiciary corresponding with the French judiciary. So diaspora groups, civil society organization, we cannot be part of the judiciary efforts. We are not habilitated. We don't have the credentials. It's a specific branch of government where, well, you cannot just open the door and just get in. So international law does apply, but again, it is under still that function where the states have the upper hand, and those issues are domestic affairs. Now, that door has been open when you talk about state cooperation, when he talks about that, when you stress the fact that grassroots and CSOs have a play, that empowers those groups. It empowers among them the diaspora, right? But it doesn't open a corridor and a pathway to, an easy intervention of multilateral groups, of other capitals, of other, and thus, obviously, the big controversy when European judges came here to have to ask some questions in the framework of their own investigations into the Lebanese explosion, because they have nationals that were harmed, so they have jurisdiction here, and they needed the authorization of the Lebanese judiciary, right? And it was this whole quid pro quo about whether that authorization was given or not, and at the end it was really given, whether formally, informally, it doesn't matter. Again, that really shows how weak and faint the Lebanese sovereignty is, but it has to go through there. That's an obstacle, but at the same time, it's also an opportunity for the Lebanese to get involved, right? Not just wait for the French, the Americans, the British to come in and solve that mess. It's something that where the instruments exist, the law exists. Now all we need is the resources and the will and the strategy to move forward. And the question is, where does the diaspora fit in? Because it has its place, it has a role, it wants to, and it just needs probably just to be framing, right, that role in a way that can really target corruption very efficiently. The ICC, yeah, we're not in the ICC approach. This is not international crimes, right? Corruption is not an international crime. It's not like war crime. It's not a genocide. It's not aggression. It's not a crime against humanity. It is a crime for states to, to resolve, to fight, to combat, with the support of other states if needed. But the core element are the states, and all, obviously, everything that falls under this umbrella, from the grassroots movements to the oversight mechanism to the judiciary. And we can see in Lebanon how weak most components of the states are. But when you look at civil society, when you look at diaspora groups, well, all you can see is energy, is vibrant motivations, and that maybe if channeled towards combating corruption, can really play a great and supportive role to really maybe not eradicate it, but at least limit its effect on the Lebanese well-being.
Thank you, Dr. Karim. There are still 2 people who haven't answered the poll. I will keep it up for a minute. Now with the second segment of today's webinar, given by Mr. Julien Pourson. Mr. Julien is a professional in the non-profit sector with over 15 years of experience. He holds a master's degree in economics from St. Joseph University in Beirut and a professional certificate in mediation from the Center for Professional Mediation at USG and Université Catholique de Paris. He holds since 2018 the position of Executive Director at Transparency International Lebanon, the national chapter of Transparency International. Prior to joining TILB, Julien worked as a consultant, researcher, and trainer in advocacy, conflict resolution, and governance. Julien has led to the strategic development of several local and regional initiatives and programs. His recent publications focused on the governance of the oil and gas sector in Lebanon. Julien, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Asma, and thank you, Karim, also for this rigorous presentation and the research that you've undertaken in terms of collaboration with TI Lebanon. First, I would like to apologize for not being able to open my camera, and I think it's due to one of the damages or consequences of illicit enrichment in Lebanon. I'm facing a power cut, so it's a bit challenging. And second, I would like to point out that I will be presenting a brief presentation on this enrichment and the role of diaspora in Arabic. So for those who would like to switch to English translation, simultaneous translation, please feel free to do so. And I will start my intervention with the 2 points before, introductory points before delving into the subject matter. So اولا لفتني بالسؤال يوجين خاصه السؤال الاخير الذي يتعلق بموضوع الفساد كجريمه دوليه مثل وموضوع محكمه العدل الدوليه. بقدر اقول لك يوجين انه حاليا بترانسبيرنسي
criminal law, we are working in transparency on the international level for corruption to transform into international crime, where we would have, hopefully after a while, an international tribunal that fights corruption. Here we're talking about major crimes of corruption that will have a big impact on human rights.
وجرائم ضد الإنسانية. بس يمكن شوي مثل الإعلان العام لحقوق الإنسان بلشنا ب 48 ل 66 لصرنا عندنا عهد خاص، وبعدين صار عندنا روما ستيتس اللي أسس الICC. ولكن ممكن بعد شوية وقت نقدر نشوف محكمة دولية تتعلق بمواضيع الفساد. هلا شغلة تانية كمان أو شغلة كتير أساسية هي إنه للأسف نحن اليوم مزبوط عم نحكي عن إطلاق غير مشروع، وهي معركة كتير أساسية حلو إنه نخوضها جميعا في الدياسبورا وعلى الصعيد المحلي أيضا. ولكن للأسف كمان اليوم في معركة تانية كتير شرسة عم بتصير على قانون الشراء العام الجديد اللي تم التصويت عليه، وبعتقد كمان قريبا رح يكون عندنا انترفنشن بهذا الإطار، وبنحب إنه نتعاون جميعا على الصعيد المحلي ودوليا في هذا الإطار، لأنه مزبوط يمكن القانون بحاجة لبعض التعديلات التقنية لتسهل تطبيقه، ولكن هذا لا يجب أن يؤدي إلى نسف جوهر القانون اللي هو عصري جدا وفيه الكثير من الأمور التي ممكن أن تساعدنا على تفادي فساد أكبر وأكبر، خاصة مثل الذي عانينا منه في السابق عبر عمليات الشراء العام. أنا عم بعمل شير السكرين تبعي، ما بعرف إذا مبينة عندكم لأنه شوي سو هلا بعتقد مش الحال. سو عمليا رح احكي عنه هلا بموضوع الاثراء غير المشروع. هو نبذه سريعه عن القانون الجديد. مثل ما بتعرفوا نحن يعني حاليا وضعنا بلبنان سيء جدا على صعيد الفساد، استشراء الفساد. مؤخرا اصدرنا مؤشر مدركات الفساد Corruption Perception Index، العلامه كانت 24 على 100، والموقع كان 150 من اصل 180 دوله. للاسف الشديد وضعنا ما زال في يعني رح اقول باللبنان المشبرح بتدحرج، اننا نتدحرج للاسف مع بعد كل شيء صار، بعد ما آلاف من اللبنانيين نزلوا على الطرقات، بعد الأزمة النقدية اللي عم نعانيها، بعد يعني الأثر الاقتصادي والاجتماعي، لا زلنا غير جديين في عملية مكافحة الفساد لليوم. سو بالانترفنشن رح احكي شوي عن الاثراء غير المشروع مثل ما قلت القانون الجديد، بعض الامور الحلو انه نعرفها، ونحكي شوي عن نحن كمنظمه بالشراكه مع منظمات المجتمع المدني شو عم نعمل حاليا وشو رح نعمل، وكيف ممكن يكون هيدا سبيل للتعاون مع الدياسبورا. مثل ما ذكر كريم، دور الدياسبورا عم بيتطور من باخر 4-5 سنين ليفوت اكثر في المضمار السياسي او المضمار حتى السياساتي، رح نحكي عنه اكثر اليوم at the policy level. نشوف كيف فينا عبر وجود اللبنانيين واللبنانيات في الخارج، عبر عواصم القرار او غيرها، خاصه في البلدان التي لديها علاقات سياسية ومالية مع الدولة اللبنانية، كيف ممكن نتساعد بهذا الإطار. سو عمليا وقت نقول قانون الإثراء غير مشروع، يعني قانون من أين لك هذا كنا سامعين عنه من الخمسينات. المرحوم ريمو إدي وقتها قدم قانونين، واحد عن الإثراء غير مشروع والثاني عن التصريح عن الذمة المالية. تم تعديل هذا القانون بال99 بطريقة لا يطبق، وهذا بحسب رئيس المجلس الدستوري الرئيس عصام سليمان بمقابله للنهار بال 2016 او 2017، بيقولها حرفيا: عدل هذا القانون بطريقه لا يطبق. يعني ما حدا بيتذكر منا في حاله اثراء غير مشروع تم احالتها على المحاكم بلبنان. ولكن بال 2020 وهون بمطرح من وراء الضغط الشعبي بلش المجلس النيابي يفكر ببعض القوانين اللي ممكن، مثل استعادة الأموال المنهوبة أو الأموال المتأتية من الفساد، ممكن بين مزدوجين تنفس شوي الضغط الشعبي وبنفس الوقت تستجيب مع المطالب الدولية. هالتندم بين الضغطين أدى أنه بمطرح يرجع ينشال هذا التعديل القانوني اللي بلش العمل عليه بال 2009، بال 2017 علق بأحد الجوارير وتم إخراجه فيما بعد، والعمل عليه ب 2020 تم يعني التصويت عليه موائمة، وأصبح أكثر موائمة مع اتفاقية الأمم المتحدة لمكافحة الفساد. وهذه نقطة كثير مهمة، وصار في تطور ملحوظ على بنود القانون، وهذه الشغلة كثير مهمة ممكن نستفيد منها. أول شيء يمكن على صعيد تعريف من هو الموظف العمومي. وهون عم نحكي عن عدة أمثلة، مش عم نحكي بس عن يمكن الأشخاص اللي بديهيا ممكن نفكر فيهم من وزراء، نواب، رؤساء، موظفين عموميين، يمكن موظفين بالوزارات. عم نحكي كمان عن كل الموظفين بالقطاع العام بما فيه يمكن الهيئات الناظمة، حتى المتعاقدين مع الدولة اللبنانية، الكونتراكتورز اللي هن بينتموا للقطاع الخاص يطالون هذا القانون. وهيدي شغلة جيدة جدا. حتى العسكر، الضباط، القضاة، طبعا مصرف لبنان والحاكم يعني المجلس المركزي وكل يعني نواب الحاكم يطالهم هذا القانون كتطبيق بشكل عام. طبعا صرنا اكثر مثل ما قلت موائمه مع اتفاقيه العهد، يعني الاتفاقيه الامم المتحده لمكافحه الفساد. وهون عم نحكي تحديدا بكيفيه تعريف واثبات جرم الاثراء غير المشروع. يعني رح بلش من مثال لاقدر يعني اعطي التعريف الجديد اللي تم اعتماده بالقانون اللبناني. اليوم عاده مثلا نطلع على موظف عمومي، موظف ما بوزاره ما او بمصلحه ما، نطلع انه هو بفئه، اعتبره فئه ثالثه او ثانيه، معروف مدخوله. عم نحكي اذا بدنا نفكر على ايام 1005 وحتى هلا، بس انه على ايام 1005 مدخوله يمكن $1500 بالشهر. بس نطلع على اللايف ستايل تبعه، على كيف عم بعيش، بنلاقي مثلا عنده 4 سيارات، 3 شقق، بسافر يمكن 6-7 مرات بالسنه، بطريقه ممكن تطرح علامه استفهام. وهيدي اللي عم بوصفه هلا ليس بالضروره اثراء غير مشروع، اكيد ممكن يكون في ايرادات يعني جايه من يمكن ورثه، او يمكن في انشطه اخرى عندهم اياها بالعائله ممكن تبرر هذا وبالتالي تعريف اثراء غير مشروع هو اي زياده في يعني خلينا نقول الذمه الماليه للموظف العمومي بطريقه لا يمكن تبريرها. يعني وهيدي شغله كثير مهمه، اصبحت مهمه التبرير والتفسير عند الموظف. وهيدا كيف بيقدر يعملها؟ عبر التصريح عن الذمه الماليه، رح نحكي عنه بعد شوي. والاثبات صار عند الموظف، بطل عند المحكمه اللي عاده ممكن واحد اذا بده يقدم اخبار هي المحكمه والتحقيق هو اللي بده يثبت هذا الشيء. بالعكس صار عند يمكن المتهم اذا جاز التعبير، او الشخص اللي فيه اخبار ضده. مثل ما عم بيصير اليوم في كثير يمكن اشخاص عم بيتم توقيفهم بتهمه الاثراء غير المشروع يعني مؤخرا، موظفين عموميين عليهم انه هن يثبتوا انه هالمدخول او هالايرادات اللي عندهم اياها مبرره قانونا، وبالتالي اذا قدروا يثبتوا هذا الشيء ما بيكون اثراء مشروع. وهذه نقطه اساسيه كثير مهمه بالقانون الجديد. هلا بطبيعه الحال قبل بالقانون القديم كمان ما كان في نص للعقوبه، مثل ما بتعرفوا ما في عقوبه من دون نص. ولكن حاليا بالقانون الجديد عم نحكي في عقوبة السجن من 3 ل7 سنين، وطبعا بيندفع بين 30 ل 200 يعني الضرب شو اسمه المينيموم ويج، يعني اللي عم نحكي المعاش، راح اسمه هلا بالعربي هلا بيرجع. المهم يعني وبالتالي صار في عقوبة. هذه هي الفكرة المهمة. هلا طبعا يمكن القيمة إذا على الدولار والفريش وعلى 90,000 دولار الواحد خفت كثير، ولكن عم نحكي عن حبس اليوم بين 3 و7 سنين، وهذا شيء جيد جدا. طبعا يعني هيدي نقطة بشكل عام كثير إيجابية. هلا بما يتعلق بالتصريح عن الذمة المالية والمصالح، ومش عم نحكي بس عن ذمتنا المالية، عم نحكي كمان شو عنا مصالح. بعض الأمثلة مثلا الممكن يلي نحكي عنها يعني هي مثلا شو عندي أنا مثلا إيرادات، شو عندي مصاري بالبيت، شو عندي مصاري بالبنك، شو عندي مجوهرات، شو عندي سيارات، شو بملك، شو علي ديون. والأهم بلبنان وخارج لبنان، مش عم نحكي بس على الصعيد المحلي. وانا يعني الزوج او الزوجه، واذا كان عندي اولاد قصر تحت 18 يطالهم التصريح عن الذمه الماليه، وبالتالي انا بصرح عن الكل. هلا مين ملزم انه يصرح؟ طبعا مش كل الفئات اللي ذكرناهم بالاول اللي بيطاروا القانون. عم نحكي الفئه الثالثه والطلوع ملزمين انه يصرحوا، وكل الموظفين العموميين اللي هن على احتكاك مع المواطن والمال العام. مثلا على سبيل المثال مثلا السجل العقاري، عم نحكي كمان عن الجمارك، موظفي وزارة المالية. طبعا يطالهم هذا التصريح، وهذه شغلة كتير مهمة يجب أخذها بعين الاعتبار. هلا مذكرين يمكن كنا نشوف دائما على التلفزيون لما يتعين وزير بيروح على المجلس السوري بيصرح عن الذمة المالية تبعه. عادة كانت تنحط بمغلف أبيض والتصريح هو شخصي، يعني بيكتب اللي بده إياه وبيتسكر. حتى إذا مش غلطان كان ينعمل له سيلينج، ينختم بشمع أحمر يمكن أو شمع عادي، وبالتالي لا يتم فتحه وما حدا عنده حق الاطلاع غير إذا صار في دعوة أو يعني محاكمة ما. اليوم بمصرف في لبنان في أكثر من 70,000 مغلف أبيض ما حدا بيعرف شو في جواتهم وإذا مصرحين أصلا مزبوط أو لا. وعلى سبيل النهفة في أحد النواب الحاليين والسابقين بخبر بأحد جلساته بقول إنه أنا لما رحت لصرح تم يعني تم أعطاني مشورة إنه حط رقم أكبر من اللي عندي إياه. أنا كان عندي 200,000 دولار بالبنك، قالوا لي حط 400,000. بما معناه لأنه لما تخرج من الوظيفة يعني يكون هذا الرقم موجود، لأنه أصلا ما في عنده كان إثبات بده يقدمه. هلأ صار في تطور ملحوظ من جهة اول شيء امتى انا بقدم هذا التصريح؟ اول شيء شهرين من بعد اصدار القانون، وبالتالي من سنتين من بعد، يعني شهرين من 2021 كل الموظفين المعنيين بهذا التصريح كان يجب عليهم ان يصرحوا حتى لو مصرحين على القانون القديم. والاحلى انه كل 3 سنين صار لازم يصرحوا، مش مثل ما كان قبل باول دخولهم على على الوظيفه وعند خروجهم منها كل 3 سنين عم نحكي، وهذا الشيء كمان جيد جدا. هلا التصريح في استماره بتتعبى مش كيف ما بدنا من حط المعلومات، وهي ستاندرد يعني للجميع بعبيها، وب يعني بحسب القانون في 15 نقطة مرجعية بالدولة اللبنانية بيتم التصريح عندهم إلى حين إنشاء الهيئة الوطنية لمكافحة الفساد اللي تم إنشائها، ولكن بعد لهلا ما تم التصويت للأسف بعد شي سنة، يعني لأنه صار في تأخير على قليلة 10 أشهر على النظام الداخلي، وما عندها بعد الموازنة الكافية والكادر الإداري، وبالتالي التصريح بعده عن تلك النقاط. على امل انه قريبا جدا يتم يعني اعتماد النظام الداخلي للهيئه الوطنيه ويصير عندها الموارد، وفي شغل يعني وضغط في هذا الاطار، وهذه نقطه جيده. وليش عم نركز على هذا الموضوع؟ لانه اليوم الهيئه الوطنيه لمكافحه الفساد عندها حق الاطلاع على محتوى هذا المغلف من دون اذن مسبق من اي احد، وهيدي يعني صلاحيه كثير مهمه عندهم اياها بالهيئه الوطنيه. اليوم اذا انا وزير ورحت صرحت، فيهم باي ديفولت الهيئه يطلعوا شو في بالتصريح، واذا شافوا في اي شيء شائك يطلبوا اثباتات ليبين اذا هذا الاثراء مشروع او غير مشروع. وكمان هلا طبعا هيدي نقطه فيها تكون احسن، هلا رح نحكي عنها بعد شوي، ولكن افضل من القانون القديم. طبعا اذا صرحت انا، اذا ما صرحت بالوقت المناسب اعتبر باعداد المستقيلين او المستقيل او المستقيله، وهذه الشغله كمان كثير مهمه. بالاضافه لهذا الشيء، في حال انا صرحت معطيات معلومات خاطئه كمان ممكن انسجن بين 6 شهور الى السنه، بالاضافه كمان مبلغ من المال لازم ادفعه. هيدول خلينا نقول بشكل مقتضب نقاط جيده جدا تحسنت وتطورت على صعيد القانون. هلا طبعا رح نرجع يمكن بمطرح اول ريسك ممكن نحكي عنه، انه دائما في قوانين جيده، في هيئات تنشا، بس يا اما ما بكون عندها الاستقلاليه الكافيه، في تدخل سياسي، يا اما ما عندها الموارد الكافيه، اتسترا اتسترا. وطبعا هدول يعني مخاوف مش بس مشروعه، كثير حقيقيه، لانه تاريخنا المعاصر ما بيثبت عكس ذلك. مشان هيك وهون يعني كمان رح نحكي يمكن اكثر بعد شوي عن الحمله اللي عم نشتغل عليها وكيف ممكن نتعاون مع الدياسبورا ومحليا ايضا، انه كل هالتصاريح عن الذمه الماليه يجب ان تكون علنيه، يعني مش بس لصالح الهيئه الوطنيه، يكون في موقع الكتروني بابليك اول شيء، يعني كل الناس تقدر تفوت وتشوف التصاريح والمحتوى تبعها بطريقه اوتوميتد. طبعا الداتا بيز لازم تكون موجوده، لازم تكون استعمالها سهل والوصول الى سهل انطلاقا من مبدا الحق في الوصول الى المعلومات. طبعا هذا الشيء بيؤدي الى بناء الشراكه مع الدياسبورا، مع يمكن الصحفيين الاستقصائيين وغيرهم، منظمات المجتمع المدني، ليقدروا يشوفوا هذا المحتوى. ومش غلط ابدا نقدر نبلش بمقاربه تاخذ المخاطر بعين الاعتبار باي معنى. يعني اليوم اذا ما قدرنا نحقق هذا المطلب على كل الموظفين العموميين، نظرا يمكن لعده اسباب، منها ثقافيه، منها سياسيه، منها تضارب مصالح، فينا نبلش قطاعيا يمكن ببعض القطاعات الاساسيه اللي عندها كثير اثر كبير على اقتصادنا، او كمان على الموظفين اللي على احتكاك مباشر بالمال العام.
certain employees who have direct contact with public revenues and maybe have this disclaimer published publicly. Why is this important? For the reasons I mentioned earlier. This is why, because I established with my colleagues several associations like a task force. And we started our session with who presented his disclaimer and not. And we sent it to these entities to give us the number of employees who have presented their claim and have not. And the information that they have sent. And there's about 5 entities who answered. And this is, we are crossing the legal deadline that the public servants have to do this and to answer on us, the concerned entities. And maybe the following step would be going to the Constitutional Board and obtain a decision if they don't answer on us.
إعلامية لنقدر نوصل لهذه الأجوبة. هذا على المدى القصير، وهون ممكن الاغتراب يساعدنا كتير، خاصة ونتساعد مع بعض، خاصة بالبلدان اللي عندها كلمة بلبنان، عم نقول الأمور مثل ما هي، واللي عندها يمكن دور مالي حالي ومستقبلي، خاصة إنه يعني رابطين كل هذا الدعم بالإصلاح اللي ممكن تجريه الدولة اللبنانية، وبالتالي بالتواصل مع يعني هالدول وإبلاغها عن إلى أي مدى الدولة اللبنانية مش عم بتطبق هذا القانون. ممكن هذا الشيء يزيد ضغط وبالتالي يساهم بتطبيق فعال لهذا القانون، بالإضافة طبعا للضغط المحلي اللي بده يصير. الهدف الثاني من هالمجموعة العمل هو حث الهيئة الوطنية لمكافحة الفساد لتستعمل صلاحياتها بموضوع الاستقصاء من جرائم الفساد، وخاصة بموضوع الإفصاح اللي بده يصير عندها. كل هالمغلفات رح تصير عندها وتصير اوتوميتد، وتقدر تشتغل شغلها وتطلع على وين عندها شكوك وتعمل التحقيق اللازم وتحيل هالملفات إلى المحاكم المختصة. هذا يمكن على المدى المتوسط لتكون الهيئة الوطنية جهزت، ولما تجهز نقدر نواكب هذا العمل ونراقب ونساعد بمطرح، لأنه يمكن بعض الإخبارات ممكن تساعد بهذا الإطار. وهون يعني الشغل اللي عم بيصير من قبل الاغتراب هو اللي خلى عمليا عدد من التحقيقات تنفتح بالخارج. يمكن أكثريتها مزبوط حاليا مركز على حاكم مصرف لبنان، ولكن يعني ما في شيء بيمنع، ويمكن في شغل بهذا الإطار في حال في أي شكوك تتعلق بأشخاص مكشوفين سياسيا يعني يكون عمل بهذا الإطار. وهذا اللي أدى يعني من شهر الوفد القضائي الفرنسي أنه يجي مثل ما قال كريم يعني في احترام لسيادة الدولة، وبالتالي عبر اليونكاك في طريقة للتعاون ضمن سيادة الدولة اللبنانية والقضاء اللبناني. وهذا الشيء صار إلى أن رأينا مؤخرا من حوالي الأسبوع يعني دعوة على الصعيد المحلي تجاه حاكم مصرف لبنان وخيه يمكن والمساعدة وكل من يثبته التحقيق. هلا هذا يمكن بشكل عام انه هيدي شغله بشكل عام واحد بينبسط له، ولكن هذا يقطع الطريق على التحقيق اللي عم بيصير من قبل الدول، لانه صار في تحقيق على الصعيد المحلي بمحل، ويمكن هذا الشيء يأثر على يعني التحقيقات اللي عم بتصير بالخارج. هيدا على صعيد النقطة الثانية. النقطة الثالثة وكمان هون كتير مهمة هي انه بدنا نعدل القانون، وخاصة فيما يتعلق بالتصريح عن الذمة المالية لكي يصبح هذا التصريح علني مثل ما كنا عم نقول. هذا شوي أكثر على المدى الأبعد، يعني عم نحكي مش قبل 2024، خاصة اليوم نحن كلنا عم نشتغل بظل غياب رئيس للجمهورية، وأول شغلة لازم تنعمل هي ننتخب رئيس ويتم تأمين النصاب، لأنه هذا واجب دستوري، وبالتالي انتخاب رئيس ونحتكم للعملية الديمقراطية لا نقدر نرجع نشكل حكومة على أمل تكون تتسم بالنزاهة والبعد عن تضارب المصالح، ويكون عندها فعلا أجندة جدية لمكافحة الفساد، مش بس على الصعيد البيان الوزاري ولكن أيضا على صعيد الخطوات العملية اللي ممكن تاخذها. يعني الجمعيات اللي نحن وياهم عم نشتغل على هذا الموضوع هن ألديك، هن أرسلوا هون على سبيل المثال لوزارة العدل، للمجلس القضاء الأعلى ولرئاسة الجمهورية طلبات المعلومات تتعلق بالأشخاص اللي هن بعتنا 31 طلب معلومات. LCPS Lebanese Center for Policy Studies كمان، LFPCP 50-50 كمان، LADE Youth Against Corruption ANND، نحن Transparency International Lebanon، ولبنانese Foundation for Renewable Energy LFRE. هيدا هو مثال عن أحد طلبات المعلومات اللي بعثناها، ومثل ما قلت فينا لهلأ في 5 جهات ردت علينا. في أحد الجهات اللي هي رئاسة الجمهورية ردت بشكل كتير سريع عبر البريد الإلكتروني، وبلغتنا أنه هيدي المعلومات موجودة على موقعها الإلكتروني وثبت هذا الشيء، وهيدي بعتقد خطوة كتير إيجابية على أمل باقي الإدارات تمتثل ويعني تنشر على مواقعها الإلكترونية هذه المعلومات. للأسف القانون لم يلزم الإدارات في ذلك، وهذا أحد شوائب القانون، إنه كل هذه الإدارات تحط على مواقعها الإلكترونية مين يلي صرح عن ذمة المالية. هون نحن عندنا المركز اللبناني لحماية ضحايا الفساد ليلك، هذا رقم التليفون. في حال يعني حيلا حدا منكم أو من اللي بتعرفون كان ضحية فساد أو بيعرف عن حدا كان ضحية فساد، ممكن يتلفلنا ونحن بنساعد نحن وياه بهذا الإطار على الصعيد القانوني، أو على صعيد يمكن الطريقة أو المقاربة الأمثل يعني لنتفادى إنه هذا الشيء يصير مع هذا الشخص. كمان في عندنا سكول اوف جوفرنانس دوت نت اللي هي كمان عليها فينا نعرف اكثر عن قانون اطلاق غير المشروع وغيرها من القوانين تتعلق بمكافحه الفساد. وهون دايسبورا كمان اللي بحب يعرف اكثر، وطبعا محليا بيقدر يفوت يعمل ريجستريشن. هيدي سيلف بيست كورسز، على وقتنا بنقدر ناخذ هيدي الحصص التدريبيه التي تتعلق، وبيطلع لنا طبعا سيرتيفيكت اوف كومبليشن اتمام الحصص. وهيدي جزء يعني لا يتجزأ من الدور، ممكن يعني لنعرف أكثر شو هن هذه القوانين كيف فينا نستفيد منها. إذا بدي لخص شوي حتى ما أطول عليكم كثير، محليا ومع الاغتراب ممكن إنه نساعد بالضغط سوية، إن كان بنتيجة الحملة اللي عم نقوم فيها ونتائجها شو رح تكون، إن كان على المستوى القصير او المدى المتوسط خلينا نقول بمتابعه عمل الهيئه الوطنيه لمكافحه الفساد اللي في كثير دول اجنبيه مهتمه بتمويل يعني عمل هذه الهيئه، وبالتالي ممكن يعني عبر الضغط الخارجي كمان نستفيد من يعني بفعاليه اكثر لهذا الدور. واهم شيء يمكن على المدى الابعد، يمكن يعني اخر 2023 اول 2024 نشتغل سوا على موضوع يصير هذه التصاريح كلها تصاريح علنية، ويعني طبعا هذا الشيء بأمن شفافية أكثر، ونقدر نحن نكون مطلعين على الضمم المالية والموظفين الماليين، ونقدر على هذا الأساس نقدر كمان نراقب هذا الموضوع. بالمبدأ يعني حبيت هيك ولو بشكل مقتضب يعني اعمل هيدي البرزنتيشن لنحكي شوي. وعم شوف هون اذا في اي اسئله على صعيد الكويشنز. اسماء اذا بدك تشوفي كمان من عندي هيك لتساعديني كمان بالموضوع.
ايه اكيد. Eugene Sansonig said that on December 10, 2023 could be used to work towards an international convention on international corruption, especially to help out failed states that refuse to interact with other countries. Courts, the diaspora can help set this up. Also, the second question was about we can share the presentation online.
ايه شكرا لك لقصه البرزنتيشن. نحن what we can share with you هي الستادي اللي انعملت التي يعني بتتعلق ب الاطراء غير المشروع والتصريح العامي عن الذمه الماليه. رح نبعثها لكل اللي شاركوا اليوم بالويبينار، ورح نبعث كمان الدراسه اللي عملها كريم بما يتعلق بدور الاغتراب في يعني مكافحه الفساد بشكل عام. رح يكونوا على الويب سايت تبعنا، وبطبيعه الحال رح نبعثهم باي ايميل كمان بهذا الموضوع. وكمان بهمنا نبقى على تواصل نشوف كيف فينا نتساعد. نحن من جهتنا بنلتزم يعني باجتماعات اضافيه ممكن نعملها مع المجموعات لنفسر اكثر ونحكي اكثر عن هذا الموضوع، مش بس بالاثراء غير المشروع. مثل ما قلت في الشراء العام اليوم في معركه كبيره تجاه هذا القانون للاسف الشديد، وغير امور اصلاحيه بتهمنا جميعا خاصه من منظار مكافحه الفساد. عم شوف كمان هون بالكويشنز. في سؤال من مس سوان يتعلق بالتحقيق في ترجير مرفأ بيروت. طبعا هلا يمكن هو سؤال يمكن لكريم، بس انه بقدر انا اجاوب عليه كون عم نتابع هذا الملف اليوم. الشيء الواضح يمكن اللي مبين اللي ممكن يقدر ينشغل عليه على الصعيد الدولي هو عبر المجلس حقوق الانسان الهيومن رايتس كونسل، اللي ممكن في حال في اكثريه فيه يرسلوا UN fact finding mission. يمكن من الصعب اليوم حسب ما مبين وحسب متابعتنا انه يعني لا الحكومه اللبنانيه رح تحول هذا الموضوع على مجلس الامن الدولي ليعمل يمكن محكمه خاصه فيه، ولا المجلس الدولي يمكن عنده الحماس الكافي انه يقدر يعمل هذا الشيء. واللي مبين بالوقت الحالي على القليله fact finding mission من اجل الحفاظ على يمكن خلينا نقول مسار التحقيق والادله يمكن اللي موجوده. طبعا في بعض الدول يعني اعطت ملفات للقضاء اللبناني، طبعا ما حدا عنده وصول الى وهذا شيء طبيعي لانه تحقيق سري، ولكن الامل الاساسي بالوقت الحالي كمان انه يطلع القرار الظني باقرب وقت ممكن. وطبعا هذا الشيء غير يعني منه يمكن بالقريب العاجل، ان شاء الله اكون غلطان. مثل ما بتعرفوا من وقت ما بلش تحقيق في كثير عراقيل يعني تو obstruct justice، وهيدي مشكله كثير كبيره. وممكن بطبيعه الحال قد ما الاغتراب عم بيعلي الصوت برا وعملوا بعض التجمعات العامه، وهيدي كانت شغله كثير ايجابيه لمسانده التحقيق على الصعيد المحلي على القليله لنقدر نعرف يعني شو صار بهذا النهار.
شكرا كثير جنيا. شارك هلا البول الثالث، بتمنى انكم تعبوه. شكرا للجميع لحضوركم الويبينار تبع اليوم. شكرا لك جميع على البرزنتيشن very interesting. شكرا أكيد لدكتور كريم مفتي. بيعتذر من الجميع بس اضطر إنه يغادر الويبينار، ونتمنى نشوفكم بإيفنتس قادمين. شكرا.
شكرا أسماء، شكرا للجميع، يعطيكم ألف عافية.